Welcome back to Breaking the Cycle of Gang Violence podcast. This is episode 8, and we have a very special guest for you today. I'm going to turn things right over to Joe so he can introduce us to him.
So yes, this week we have a very special guest, our very own Chief Robert Nevarez. Chief Nevarez has been chief here in Delano for 2 years, since July of 2018. Prior to that, he worked for the Fresno Police Department, and he was there for 32 years, with 15 of those years as Deputy Chief of Police. Chief Nevarez has a vast public speaking experience, serving as Toastmasters for over a decade. Chief Nevarez enjoys teaching, having taught at Reedley College, DeVry University, and the University of Phoenix. And this year, he's set to be teaching at Bakersfield College at the Delano campus this fall, correct?
That is correct.
All
yes.
Right. Welcome, Chief.
Thank you for that introduction.
Appreciate it.
It's a lengthy introduction. I like that there. I would love to start by just kind of getting some feedback and your thoughts on the podcast series.
Well, so far, it's gone great. We'll see how this podcast goes, but thus far, it's gone really good. It has accomplished what I was hoping to do, and that's for people to get an insight into the gang problem, and hopefully, with that insight, find different avenues in which to battle the problem, because this is not new. And although I believe we've done a lot as a society, clearly what we've done over the last 30 to 40 years has not broken the cycle. Mm-hmm. It's still here. And I think that one of the first steps is being able to look at what we're dealing with in hopes that we'll get that insight and make some other changes in the future.
And I know shortly after you guys had the double homicide of the 2 young girls here, a lot of different things came out of that. I feel like this was partially a branch of that too. Can you give us an update kind of on how things are going now?
Well, unfortunately, we don't have any witnesses that have come forward in the case, which sets us back. Although we did collect a lot of physical evidence that's been processed in part. We're still processing other pieces of that crime scene. But what we're really hoping for is somebody to come forward and say, yeah, it was these people, but we're not getting that. And you're absolutely right. This is a direct result of that vigil that we had to pay tribute to all the victims. And a lot of ideas have come out of that and actually have gotten momentum. For example, I mentioned that victims won't come forward, and I guess you could complain about that, till the end of time. So we came up, rather than do that, we came up with a way of plugging into the Kern County Secret Witness Program, because we've always had reward funds, but we've never distributed those. And the reason is because that fear is very real in this community. People are afraid for their own safety. And so with this Kern County Secret Witness Program, the ability to give that money anonymously, I'm really hoping that we can break that ugly cycle of not having people come forward.
Mm-hmm. And I know you guys also developed a gang task force. Can you kind of talk about that?
Yes, we teamed up with the McFarland Police Department, as we did back in January. But in addition to that, we've taken on other partners. The county has come on board, the district attorney's office. This morning I was speaking with Lyle Martin, who heads up their investigations division, on what they can also do to help us in that regard. We also have state partners and federal partners. And there's a lot of things that we're doing right now, some of which I really can't talk about publicly. I don't want to give away strategies, but I can tell you that it's very comprehensive. We increased the size of our team from 4 to 8. That's a big deal because we're a department of 56. Mm-hmm. And so that percentage of our agency is dedicated to gang enforcement. And they're out in the evenings, out trying to break up the cycle. Having worked for the Fresno Police Department for all those years, I don't know that I don't think it's a realistic expectation that we're going to eliminate gangs. But what I have learned over the years is that if law enforcement is out there and they're aggressively addressing these gang members, it disrupts them. It removes their anonymity. And if I can take this community and take us from one shooting every week to maybe once every 3 to 4 weeks and slow down the rate of violence, I'll take that. until we can, as a society, come up with a solution to actually break the cycle of gang violence.
I want to talk a little bit about your time in Fresno. Obviously, we know you were there for a long time. What was your experience like? What did you do while you were there? Can you kind of go into some background?
Sure. Well, I started like anybody else, working a beat in Southeast Fresno. I had the beat at the old University Medical Center, Valley Medical Center when I started, Cedar and Ventura. And it was a pretty active area, a lot of gangs. And I did that for about 4 years. And then somebody found out, now Mayor-elect Dyer, then Sergeant Dyer found out that I had a knack for playing a role. And so he put me undercover right out around the surrounding area, around the fairgrounds. And I worked undercover, and I was successful at it. And I ended up working narcs for 4 years. And during that time, I was on SWAT. And I was fortunate. I ascended the organization pretty quick. I was a sergeant after about 7 years as an officer. After 7 years as a sergeant, I was promoted to lieutenant. A year later, captain, and then 3 years later as a deputy chief. So I spent my final 15 years out of a 32-year career as a deputy chief of police.
Wow.
And I oversaw a lot of different things: patrol, support, skywatch, mounted, motors. The last 11 years, I was over administration specifically, so I was in charge of all of discipline. And so even though I got good relations there, I wasn't necessarily the most popular guy in the department, because whenever you got in trouble, you got a letter from me. But it was an incredible experience. Really, I owe where I'm at now to the Fresno Police Department, because without those experiences, it really is hard to become a chief of police and handle the full breadth of what it takes to do the job. And I was very fortunate to also work for a really good chief, Chief Jerry Dyer. He's a great role model. In fact, I was texting him last night and thanking him for all the lessons that I learned through watching him. I was very fortunate. And so that's my background. Yeah.
It's extensive.
But do you have a Jerry Dyer bobblehead?
Well, I don't. I don't, because somebody stole mine. I think the president of his fan club is sitting right over there.
Oh,
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah. If I didn't have such strong self-esteem, I'd be jealous. But that's okay. I could share. It, but I don't.
I love that. I would love to hear a little bit more about the undercover days, if you could, if there's any stories or anything specifically related to gangs that maybe you can talk about, what you learned in those specific instances.
Well, yeah, I actually have to go back to my childhood, my first exposure to gangs. I was raised in Modesto, California, and I was raised by a Mexican father who came here illegally initially. As a little boy, he was deported. But I always remember my father telling me that, don't worry, in Spanish, he would tell me, I'll be back soon, and one day me voy a arreglar. I'm going to get everything straightened out so that he wouldn't keep getting deported. And he did. But my father was really in my life. Mm-hmm. He was in my business. He knew who I was hanging around. When it got dark, I had to be in the house. He knew who all my friends were, and he was in my room every day. And so there was nothing that I was going to be able to pull over and him not be aware of. And looking back now, I am just so grateful for that. As a young kid, I had no idea who the cops were. I didn't know what cops were. It didn't matter to me. What I cared about was my dad, because if he found out, there was going to be a consequence. He was fair about it, but he was also involved. I grew up around relatives, friends, and I remember around junior high school, as I was watching Mike's the very first podcast, and I was very attentive to when it was that he went down that road and started committing crimes, and it was right around that same age, 7th grade, 8th grade, and I recall that vividly. I remember friends in elementary school, very naive, innocent, and then in junior high, they started hanging around at my school, the Oak Tree. That's where kids went to go get stoned. And I knew one thing: if I went out to the Oak Tree, there was a price to pay for that. And so that's what kept me on the straight and narrow. I have cousins that didn't quite have that same level of parental involvement, and they went down a path of gangs, crime, and drug addiction. And as a 56-year-old man, I know those guys that are also in their 50s, and their lives took a tragic turn. And I just really consider myself fortunate. When I was watching Mike, I couldn't help but just be very grateful about how fortunate I was to have an involved father. And it's caused me to be introspective of that, because somebody who just happened to grow up, unfortunately, not having that parental involvement, they go down that path. It doesn't make them necessarily bad. I choose not to look at it that way anymore, because I think that's the way we've looked at it over the last 30 to 40 years, and it's not helping. But instead, feel some sympathy for them and try to help them where they are. And I know this is probably not the most popular view in law enforcement, but waiting for somebody to get out of a gang lifestyle before you help them, I don't just don't know how realistic that is, because of just societally how we've broken down in that area. And so I've got a different perspective now than I had 6 weeks ago, in large part because of this podcast.
Yeah. So growing up around that and having some friends and things like that went a different direction, you obviously had your parents involved, or your father specifically. What did you take from that experience going into your police work and undercover work?
Well, it helped me because I saw a lot of those friends and relatives, and I saw how they dressed, how they spoke. I didn't dare dress like that. My dad, I just knew that my dad would not let me wear black clothes. And I didn't get why. He knew that style of dress, all the dark colors, was indicative of something. But I saw my friends and relatives dressing like that. Not all my relatives, but some of my relatives. And so down the road, when I had to go undercover, I just thought back, well, I'll dress like the people that I saw dress.
Right.
And so I took that personality, and I could speak like it because I'd heard it so frequently. I didn't speak like that, but I knew how to emulate it. And I used that and leveraged it into a narcotics position.
And it worked.
It did work.
It
yeah.
worked, at least most of the time. It sounds like it was pretty successful.
I was fortunate. I worked around a lot of good undercover officers, and did a lot of things that were really unsafe. Looking back now, I'm just grateful that I wasn't hurt. It's weird when you're 20. Back then, narcotics, I was 24 till the time I was about 27. You do things that are really dangerous and don't think about it later on. You're just very grateful.
Yeah, thankfully.
Yeah.
Thankfully, a happy ending there for you.
Yes.
Everybody is safe.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about the patterns and themes that you've seen throughout your law enforcement career, whether it was back then and how it's changed to now, or certain things that are just common that you've seen over the years.
Well, probably the thing that's the most common, that's frustrating, is seeing the gang conflict and how it continues through the generations, and to the point where now, in my community, I have two gangs, basically norteños and sureños, and they just don't like each other. And the principal core reason to when that started and the reason behind it got lost. It's just that they're not us. And what's really sad is that the recklessness with which their crimes are carried out, and how frequently now in my community that recklessness results in the completely innocent loss of life. When a gang member goes into a gang lifestyle, they know what they're getting into. And I'm not advocating for violence. I don't think anybody should be subject to violence, but at least they know what they're getting into. But when you have, for example, the most recent double murder we had, you have completely innocent little girls that have nothing to do with anything other than just doing what they should be able to do in our community. And that's the part that really, the commonality that I saw back in Fresno, because this is not new. I went to a lot of vigils there as well. And that's the pattern that I see. And getting to the core of what causes people to go into gangs, I think, makes it that much more critical that we be able to find that solution.
What do you think it is? Let's get your perspective on that. What do you think either attracts them in or pulls them in? And what should parents be aware of?
Well, from my perspective, it really, the gang it's an extended family. I think Mike said this, it's a place where there's a sense of belonging. And so they're looking for that, and that's what they reach out to. These are people that would give their life for them. Clearly. I mean, that's why they go into the gang. See, I had that at home. I had a father and a mother who, in my view, would give their life for me. I remember my dad telling me, when I'd get hurt, doing kid stuff, he'd say in Spanish, if I could take away your pain, I'd take it. I'd give it to me. So I didn't have a need to go out and look for that. And so to me, that's what the gang is all about. I remember 33 years ago when I was in Fresno, and gangs were Fresno didn't even have a gang unit back then. That's how new this phenomenon was. And I remember kids that went into the gangs back then and thinking how their lives were dysfunctional. I mean, Mike said it. He called himself dysfunctional. They're just looking for that place where they have love, support, unconditional support. And that's where they find it. And so, I know this is a lot harder to get to, but really the solution is having strong families, people that they can connect to when they're young, so that they're not out looking for that pseudo family that they say it's unconditional love, but when it comes right down to it, it isn't. And really, that's at the core of the solution. Now, there's going to be kids that grow up without that. And so I think at that point, it's up to society, a community, churches, nonprofits to step up and fill that void so the gangs don't have to fill it.
Yeah, we've talked about a lot of different solutions through the podcast. People have a lot of different ideas, whether it's community centers, whether it's, calling law enforcement the first time, your child decides to leave the house without permission and they're missing at that point. What do you think we can specifically do? I know you're saying churches and nonprofits, but what specifically, especially if a person doesn't want to overstep into somebody else's family?
It's interesting you raised that question about 3 weeks ago. I woke up at about 4 or 5 in the morning, and I had this woman's name on my heart, Susan Bachara. And Susan Bachara started the House of Hope in Fresno, 30 years ago. It's a long time ago. And she was way ahead of her time. House of Hope, in a nutshell, was a house that she created where members of gangs could go in their gang while they were gang members. And the desire was to get them into that place and then help them plug into resources to get them out of it. Job, training, education, tattoo removal, a whole variety of things. I really think that she is on to something. Having a place. In fact, I think Mike may have mentioned that, or maybe it was the mother of one of the victims, that their kids didn't have any place to go. We say, well, we want you to go to the Boys and Girls Club. We want you to go to this other thing. If they don't want to go, we have to find a way to get them into those services. And so that may be something that has got some hope attached to it. And so I'm hoping that in the next few weeks that Susan will be to the place where she can come down and visit and share some ideas on how we might be able to do something here. She dealt specifically with Southeast Asian gangs back 30 years ago. If you Google her, you'll see that she's got a tremendous amount of education in that area of reform.
Can you talk a little bit more about this House of Hope? Because to me, that sounds counterintuitive to allow gang members to show up at a house. And what if they're potentially from opposing gangs and things like that?
Absolutely 100% accurate. I remember years ago when she first started up, one of their first gatherings was at the back of a church, my church. And people were very curious about why would we allow this? And there ended up being a violent crime there. And so everybody's like, see, we knew this was going to happen. And she's just a very resilient, persistent person. Maybe 2 or 3 years later, she resurfaces, but this time she created her center right next to the Southeast Policing Station, 50 yards from our parking lot where there's a bunch of police cars. And she figures, well, this should be a relatively safe place to put it. Initially, I'll be honest with you, I wasn't real excited about it. But it continued there for years and years, and it just seemed like that place was someplace that was about as safe as you can make it, while still allowing gang members to come hopefully find resources to get them out of it.
And do you think it was successful because it became a comfortable place for everybody to come?
I think it was comfortable because of her and her reputation, but it was safer because the police were nearby. And so, and that's what allowed it to continue for years and years. And I lost track of her. And then I saw that she actually has a podcast series as well.
Oh, wow.
So, but it's going to take something out of the box. It's got to be creative, resourceful. What we've been doing is not working. I'd like to say that, yeah, we'll just keep doing what we're doing, but it's not working. There's more violence now than there was 30 years ago. So we got to come up with different ways of solving this. And I want to say this also, when it comes to solutions, police have a tendency to always be at the forefront. And I think there's a reason why, because if you need somebody 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, Christmas, Thanksgiving, you pick up the phone and you call 911 and we come. But we are not the solution to gangs. By the time we get called, this person's 18, 19, and 20 years old. They've had a whole lifetime of influence. The solution's back here. It's back here. And that's not the police. That's not why we exist to begin with. But unfortunately, as we stand around these crime scenes and look at all the carnage and destruction and pain and suffering, I feel like I got to do something. But ultimately, I know that somebody's got to step up from our communities and take the lead in this, because it's not should not be a police-led change.
Right. Well, DA Cynthia Zimmer actually gave a description that's sunk in for me. She said there's, prevention, intervention, and then suppression. She was like, by the time it gets to police, it's suppression because we're just trying to stop it. She's like, or even for the DA's office. So it's before that really is what we've kind of figured out, I think, through the podcast series, that somebody has to step in.
If you listen to all the stories, some commonalities that I found is Mike was hard-headed, right? And then another one of the boys that died was very stubborn and wouldn't listen. So you hear that resistance to the parent. I got to my stubborn phase. It didn't last long because my father said, "No, I'm your father. You're going to do what I tell you," and pushed me back. I mean, because all young boys, when they get a certain age, start to kind of feel, themselves and want to take over. Parents have to be parents. My dad was not my friend. He wasn't. Clearly, he was not there to be my dad or my friend. He was there to be my father. He created guidelines, guardrails to keep me from hurting myself. I didn't get it all the time, but I had enough respect not to push outside of those guide rails. Thank God. Otherwise, I may not be sitting here.
And I know you worked in gangs for a period of time, like gang unit for a period of time. Was that the same sort of style you saw, the stubborn, the hard-headed, or were some people borderline?
Yeah, that's the common trend with the people we contacted. I was in the gang unit for 4 years. I actually supervised the unit, and not only with the people we contact, but and I think I mentioned it last episode, is the stubbornness with the parents, because the parents are in denial that their child is a gang member. I mean, no parent wants to admit, yeah, my child's in the gang, until it's too late. But once you start admitting to things or realizing that there is a problem, then that's when the problem can start changing or trying to solve the problem.
Yeah.
Over the past couple years that you've been here in Delano, what changes have you seen for better or worse when it comes to gangs?
Well, up until early this year, I thought we were making some real headway. We went from 10 murders the first year I was here in 18 to 8 murders last year. And then this year, January, just started off horrible. We had a couple of shootings, completely innocent victims, and not gang members. And so, I remember my boss, then Jerry Dyer would say that the battle against gangs is battle you never win, but must always be fought. And so you just don't lose hope, and you just keep on plodding along because you owe it to the community to hopefully save a life or two. That said, I do think that over the years that we've been able to increase trust in the community, and that includes gang members. Believe it or not, they're part of the community. I can't ignore them, and so when I see gang members out in the community, I'm respectful to them, interactive. I'll never forget the first time I was at a parade, a Christmas parade. I like to go out and mingle before the parade starts, and there were some gang members standing over on the curb, and I walked over to them and, hey, introduced myself, Chief Nevarez, nice to meet you. They weren't impressed, and but there was a little boy there next to him. I don't know if it was a nephew or son or brother or whatever, and so I got on a knee and I started to interact with him. I handed him a card, and I was real nice to him. Actually, I even picked him up and I held him, and I know they didn't want to like me. But they couldn't help but be okay with the fact that I was being nice to their little cousin or brother.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we've done a lot to try to increase that level of trust with everybody. I was fortunate. I inherited a really good group of employees. I just got a great group of officers, and I think I've just been fortunate to take what was already good and add to it. And for me, I'll take that, even though, we've had 5 murders this year. I do think that our community is open to us policing them in a little more assertive fashion because they trust us. And, I don't want to go down that path because I could spend an hour here talking about community and trust and how important that is. But that's one of the things that hopefully has improved or is changed for the better.
Mm-hmm. How would you compare the gang activity to what you saw in Fresno, knowing, of course, that Fresno is much larger than Delano?
One thing that's good is that in Fresno, I would go to my staff meetings on every Monday morning, and I'd leave depressed because it was not uncommon to have 14, 15 shootings in a week. The biggest difference between here and there is there were African-American gangs, there were Asian gangs, and then there were Hispanic gangs. And there's a lot of different sets and subsets. Here, primarily, it's Norteño Sureño. So it's a little bit easier to focus on it because the problem is a little bit more finite versus over there, it was just so broad and nebulous at times, and it was really hard to keep track of all the moving parts. And so because of that, here, we are able to track every gang member in the city. We know where they live. We know their cars. We know all of those things. And so it's just a little bit more manageable and not quite so overwhelming. That's not to say that you have a double murder with 2 innocent little girls. That becomes overwhelming, but just the volume's not the same as it was in Fresno. So we're fortunate from that regard.
Yeah. Do you have a most memorable, for better or worse, any sort of violent crime that had to do with gangs or interaction with gangs, whether that was here or in Fresno?
There's a lot of them, unfortunately. Obviously, recently we had 2 scenes where 5 people were shot. One was the one with Adam Guillen just down the street on County Line Road, and then the other one more recently. Those were the 2 that stand out the most. One of the first murders I had here in Delano really hit me hard. It was a double murder or a double shooting, one murder just west of the station. And I remember rolling up on the scene and to this very neatly manicured front lawn on the corner where an elderly woman lived. And this shooting occurred between rival gangs, and one of the vehicles lost control and went through her front fence, and the vehicle came to rest in her front yard. And one of the victims that died, we pulled out of the car to do CPR, and he died in her front yard. And I remember how bothered that made me, that here's a lady who's got complete pride in her yard, in her neighborhood, and now there's a guy laying in her front yard dead. and how that's not acceptable. It's just not acceptable. And if anybody in this community ever says, well, that's just Delano, I'm sorry, I don't buy into that. I don't have that vision for this city. Even if it happens, I'm not going to buy that vision. And so somebody told me on scene, welcome to Delano. And I put my hand up and I said, no, I don't accept that. Because once we accept it, then they just run rampant. And so, but that was very visual for me. And it just bothered me tremendously that now this woman is going to have that image carved into her mind for the rest of her life. And it's just not right.
It sounds like anytime innocent bystanders or like this woman who had just happened to end up in her front yard are brought into this world, it sort of recharges you to want to take a stronger grasp on it.
It does. It bothers me probably more than healthy for it to bother somebody, but I feel like I owe it to the community for it to bother me. Because if it stops bothering me, then I'm going to lose my motivation to keep coming up with more creative ways with my team, and hopefully inspire them to come up with solutions. So yeah, it does re-energize me. It does. Yeah.
What are you hoping people take away from this podcast series?
Well, I think the most important thing is the solution to this is, like I said, it's bigger, it's deeper than the police department. And so I was just hoping to have a platform for people to watch different thoughts about gangs. We all have a different perspective. And I know that the police perspective alone isn't going to solve this. And so that's why it's been so beneficial for me to see all the other stories, mine included, in hopes that an idea out there will spring forward. I have hope in humanity. I really do. But thank God we're not all reliant on the ideas that come out of Bob Nevarez's head, because we'd all be in a world of hurt. So hopefully somebody out there will see all of these and think, let's try this. And we try it. And hopefully that'll help break that cycle of gang violence. We've got to do it.
What do you want those people, if they do decide to step up and try something, what do you want them to know from your perspective?
Well, I want them to know that I'm open. I'm open-minded. That the solution is not going to come from me. I want them to see the horrible things that have happened, and for that to serve as motivation, as drive, not just to have the thought and the idea, but the drive to follow through and push that through to where those ideas become action. One of the things, the quality that I have when I see ideas and so forth, I don't just like to have ideas. I like to put them on paper and get momentum behind them to where we can actually see visible change happen. And so it's my hope that that person that's out there that has this idea will be that sufficiently motivated to drive through with a clear understanding that with any good idea, there's going to be opposition. I don't care. There's going to be opposition, and that person has to be driven to go through it. And the images of all these victims that we've seen over the years, hopefully that's that drive.
What would you like the community to know about the police department moving forward?
Well, I say this in every single setting that I'm at. The absolute most important thing for me, for the police department and the community, is having trust in us. Without trust, we're dead in the water. Because if people don't trust us, they're not going to collaborate with us in hopes of coming up with solutions. There's a lot of work left to do in this community. A lot of work. We've been able to do a lot because of that trust. I just hope that people look at us, my officers, Jose, Rafa, myself, all the officers, and that they see that we're just people. We're just people. I don't know, for some reason, it's easy to look at this uniform and think that somehow we got transplanted from another planet and are here to try to keep things safe. We're not. We are you. I always share this story. I'll bore you with it again. But when I'm talking to Hispanic residence academies in Spanish, parents will frequently bring their kids because they can't afford daycare. And I'll look at the crowd and I'll see, mom and dad, they're in their late 30s, early 40s, and they got a little kid there sitting next to them or in a chair next to them that's 4 or 5 years old. And I tell them, I want you to look at your son and realize that's me. That's me 50 years ago. I'm not an outside presence. I am you. That your little boy there could end up being me. So don't see us as an outside occupying force. We are here. We're here to earn your trust, but we got to earn it. And so that's what I want the community to know, is that we hope to continue doing everything we can to earn and keep that trust. Without it, it's going to be impossible to get things done.
I have one final question. Just plain and simple, what do you think, if they didn't listen to anything else we said this entire podcast, what do you think could help break the cycle of gang violence?
Parents, pay attention to your kids. Be their parent. Be friendly, but your role is not to be their friend. Your role is to be their parent. Keep them safe, and that includes knowing who they're hanging around and what they're involved in.
All right, Chief. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, before we end this episode, I want to turn it back over to the Chief.
All right.
So, Chief has a special announcement he wants to make.
Oh,
All right. We have something for you, Jessica.
for me?
Yeah, we do.
Oh my gosh.
Jessica.
They're springing this on me, by the way. I did
Yes.
not know this was coming. Oh, thank you.
We are, Jessica, we are so grateful for your support in doing this. Again, we come up with a lot of ideas. And in fact, this was Jose's idea. And when he reached out to you, I thought, well, maybe she'll help. She's kind of busy. She's a big deal. She's real popular, and maybe Delano. I don't have time for that. But your reaction was just the opposite, and I am just so thankful that you were willing to do this for us, because the truth is we don't know what the heck we're doing here. We threw together a scene and so forth, but we really needed you to help facilitate this, and you've done a great job of it, and you are making a difference. So we thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
No, I was grateful. You guys reached out to me. The first phone call, I wasn't expecting it. And so once you said that you wanted to bring this up, and initially, for those who didn't know, I was just supposed to come in for one episode, just to help out for one episode. And then our conversations continued, and we ended up here. And we
Yes,
did
we
a full
did.
series, and I'm
So show that to
beyond
the cameras.
grateful. It's a plaque that says, "With our greatest appreciation, the Delano Police Department hereby presents Jessica Harrington for unwavering support and unrelenting guidance that helped create the podcast series, Breaking the Cycle of Gang Violence. We thank you with appreciation and gratitude. Robert Nevarez, Chief of Police, September 3rd, 2020. Thank you
Jessica.
so much.
Thank
I
you.
really
You also
appreciate
have a copy of the letter on your desk if you want to. Chief, the copy of the letter is on your desk if you want to read that to her.
Oh, okay. All right.
Oh, you have a copy too.
I do?
I guess.
Yeah.
So I have a letter.
Oh, I do.
That's right.
Okay. See, obviously, we don't know what we're doing here. This letter is being written to recognize and commend Jessica Harrington for her dedication and role as the host for Breaking the Cycle of Gang Violence podcast series. For the past 8 episodes, you have interviewed our guests for our community members and provided important information to educate the public. All of your time and effort paid off tremendously. Since the produced podcast has been educational and inspiring, it is clear to me that you have a great deal of concern and passion for our community, and I do mean that. On behalf of our department, we appreciate the time you generously volunteer to be part of this podcast. Sincerely, Robert Nevarez.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would hug you both if we
Yeah,
weren't under
we can't.
COVID
We're under
restrictions.
COVID. Yeah.
But thank you. Thank
So-
you again very much.
Yeah, so all this mix
Thank
up,
you.
so that's what happens. We don't consult with you first. So that's how lost we'd be.
Yeah.
But overall, I just want to thank you. Thank you for your patience. I know, like I said, it was all new to us. I'm not a media personality, so this was like crazy for me. But thank you for your patience, your guidance. I truly appreciate everything.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you guys again. Appreciate it.
All right, so this is again the end of the podcast. I want to give a special thank you to Benjamin Olivar, who produced the show. Behind the scenes, we had Rafael Silva, Chief Nevarez, our guest for today, our host Jessica Harrington, and I'm Corporal Madrigal. Thank you for joining us.